I'm Robin Miller-Brecker.
And I'm Karen Lenzer. Welcome to Seeking Center, the podcast.
Join us each week as we have the conversations and weed through the spiritual and holistic clutter for you. We'll boil it down to what you need to know now.
We're all about total wellness, which to us means building a healthy life on a physical, mental, and spiritual level. We'll talk to the trailblazers who will introduce you to the practices, products, and experiences that may be just what you need to hear about to transform your life.
If you're listening to this, it's no accident. Think of this as your seeking center and your place to seek your center. And for even more mega inspo, sign up for Seeking Center, the newsletter at seekingcenter.app. We are so excited for this conversation. Courtney Beck worked as a strategy director in advertising before a spontaneous spiritual awakening forced her to jump off the corporate ladder into the spiritual world. Courtney now works as a spiritual author, channel, and healer, helping everyday people expand in supernatural ways. She wants you to think of her as your supernatural wingwoman. She works with spirits to solve problems people can't fix. Just as we have specialists in the real world, her spirit guides are specialists too, removing everything from anxiety, negative beliefs, and curses to amplifying confidence, creativity, and courage. Karen and I can attest that our work with Courtney and her team has been transformative. Courtney has also started Ente Collective, a virtual space that brings kindred spirits together. Courtney shares a collection of healing meditations, lessons, and live healings with the spirits who have stepped forward to help each of you. We'll be discussing all. Let's get talking. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Robin and Karen. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness. Can you feel our excitement that you're here today?
Your spirit team, our spirit team, which is really a blessing.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. And we're fresh off a reading with you too. So cannot wait to dive into this
Really,
conversation.
it's a reading and healing. You helped really facilitate so much healing and transformation within each of us, as well as guidance to help us move forward. So we can't wait to dive into all of it. Let's start with your journey into this work and these abilities and this knowing. When did these whispers start and what happened to have this spontaneous spiritual awakening?
I'll probably start from when I was a kid. I would see spirits as a child, and I didn't find out until I was in my 30s that my grandmother also had these visions of spirits as well. But I think in that sense, I was alone in not realizing that I had these gifts, just that I would have these. Like my parents, when I was in elementary school, we lived in this 100-year-old miner's cottage. And now I realize it was super haunted because I would see this blue light traveling down the hallway at night, and I'd keep a baseball bat by my bed, which I now realize you can't hit something that's transparent. But it started from when I was a kid and when I was really young. My grandfather, who served in Egypt in the war, would tell me that I would speak Egyptian in my sleep. And my parents took me to a British Museum exhibition when it came to Melbourne, Australia. And it was all of the Egyptian artifacts. And I took them around and I was telling them, this is what we used this for, and this is how we used this, and the things that don't come from, say, a normal kid. But it was really terrifying because I didn't have a teacher or a guide. I didn't want anything to do with it. So I ended up choosing a really logical career and going into strategy in the advertising world in creative. I guess that was my method, my very logical human method of escaping my abilities and gifts. And so I ended up getting my dream job in the advertising world, which was a strategy director. And it's the type of job where I just could have been set for life and stayed in that role and had this fantastic lifestyle living by Sydney Harbour. And I got into that chair and it just was this total feeling of emptiness where I'd been chasing this one thing my whole life, thinking it would fill this hole in my heart. And when I got there, it didn't actually do that. And it coincided with my wife, Jules, being very sick at the time. And so I was forced into this position where I had to turn, A, I needed to work out how could we get Jules through this, and B, I always had this spooky side, like I'd trained in Reiki, and I still had an interest in spirituality, but it was like my dirty little secret at the time. Because as you would both probably know, being in the corporate world, talking about spirituality, you never really know the response that you're going to get for that. So I trained as a Reiki master, and it coincided with working out what I was going to do career-wise, because I needed to be at home with Jules and our daughter Bella. And I just really logically decided to start meditating because I thought, if I can't do this super intense role in my career anymore, what am I going to do? And so so I started using the Calm app, thinking I'll just empty my mind and work out a very logical plan as to what I'm going to do next, thinking I could offshoot into marketing or whatever I was going to do. And I was down by the water actually on Sydney Harbour and was meditating, and I had, I think, what was a Kundalini awakening, or the spirit saw it as an opportunity to jump into me. And I felt a spiral activate up my spine, and I felt like someone else was in my body. And I raced home to Jules, and Jules is the most beautiful, gentle and patient partner. And I said to her, something's happened. I feel like there's someone else in my body and I can't really explain what's going on. And Jules just said, okay, we'll just handle it. Don't hold back from it. We'll just keep going. And I went and had a shower, and I looked down at my body, and it was like I was seeing my body for the first time. Not as the body I see in the shower every day, but it was this really strange experience of seeing myself through someone else's eyes. And I was having really strange food cravings, and I was really excited about driving. And I like driving, but I'd never get excited about driving. And it was that same morning that I put on an audiobook, and I heard a voice say, this is human knowledge. You now have access to universal knowledge. And I'd started hearing this.
You heard this on the audiobook, or you heard it?
Coming from inside my body. So it was like I'd gone from being myself to then having someone else there. And I had absolutely no idea who or what this was. And at that stage, I didn't think I was ready to ask. And so I also felt my arms and hands light up, like I just wanted to write. And I just sat down at my computer and started typing. And what came out of me was all of this information about the universe and Vishnu and Krishna. And so I came out of the womb really anti-religion. So I've never dabbled into the religious space. And we went for dinner that night at a friend's place. And he's an architect and she's a yoga instructor. And I said, can you just read this to the yoga instructor and just tell me what you think of it? And she said, Court, this is Hindu cosmology. Where did you get this? And I said, this is what's happened and this is what's come out. And yeah, and then the next day I asked who it was, and I got that it was Krishna, and I had no idea who Krishna was. And basically he said that I needed to get myself out of advertising within a year, that I was going to spend the rest of my life writing these books, which what came out of me that day was the first 2 chapters of the first book that we wrote together. But yeah, it's been a wild ride since then.
So many questions.
It's a hard story to tell.
No, but
of course.
mesmerizing.
Yes. Yeah. And so, okay, let's talk about Kundalini experience and a Kundalini awakening. What is that? I know you briefly said that you felt like something jumped into you. Can you explain that for those listening who may not know what that is?
Yeah. So Kundalini, and I'm not an expert in Kundalini awakenings. I just believe that's what happened to me. But it's basically an activation that comes from the base of the spine and travels up through the spine into the crown. And we work with Isis, who's an Egyptian goddess, and she shows it to me as 2 beautiful neon green snakes that come up the spine and basically activate something in the crown chakra. But it can be quite painful for people. It's basically a really spontaneous awakening of something else inside the body.
And can it be activated through other means other than, let's say, meditating?
Yes, you can try to activate it through yoga. I think some people actually try to activate it. Definitely not something I could recommend because it turned my life upside down. But I think for me, the spirits were just looking for a way in. I'm incredibly busy in my mind all the time. And I think meditating was just their entry point into getting me to, or giving me everything that I needed to take the next step.
Yeah. And I feel like perhaps too, we often hear that Reiki is another gateway for allowing yourself to be open for that kind of experience, or at least a higher level of connection with spirit. And I wonder if that was another, I don't know, aggregator of having that come through you.
Yeah, Reiki was definitely, I always say to people, I feel like Reiki is a gateway that opens you up to, if there's the universe, I think that Reiki is a doorway that opens you up to everything else in the universe. Yeah, my experience with Reiki was fascinating. So I was a really bad asthmatic as a kid, and I'd spent so much time in hospital. I would turn blue because I couldn't breathe. And so mum and dad actually got me to do Reiki because I had a really bad attack one night at a friend's place, and she was a Reiki master, and she put her hands on my chest and was is the only thing that has ever calmed me down. So mum and dad booked me in for Reiki and ended up doing Reiki 1. In Reiki 2, I realized that I could channel, like it just turned on, but I never really wanted anything to do with it. And then when I did my Reiki masters, that was a ride because I'd always suppressed everything. Like I've got trauma in my background from my childhood. And I think I got really good at in the corporate world because I was so good at switching off my emotions. And when I'd gone to do my Reiki masters, one of the spirits that I'd worked with, she'd said to me, we're going to smash your bottle, as in the bottle that you store everything with. You're going to have to learn how to deal with all of your emotions now. So it's definitely something to be taken seriously. There's a lot in it. That's for sure.
And then can we also talk about who Krishna is? Because I think there's a lot of people listening who may not know who he is.
Yeah. And I had no idea either. And when all this was happening, I purposefully didn't look into who these names were because I wanted it to just remain as pure as possible. I didn't want to get caught up in my head with anything. So Krishna is the Hindu deity of love, compassion, and tenderness. So he's a really popular deity, very loving and kind. And I joke that he's like my spiritual dad now, like my big blue dad. He's got blue skin in pictures. He's been a really great teacher, and I think I needed really gentle teachers because I wouldn't have come into this work. I was very apprehensive about giving myself over to this work, mainly because of what other people would think of me as well. So he's been a fantastic guide, and I hear him pretty constantly. So he's become a bit like a best friend over the years. It happened in 2016, so it's been a long time that we've been, I was going to say, cohabiting my body. Connected, constantly connected. Yeah.
So Courtney, when he came into your experience, how was that? Was it really in your writings? Were you meditating daily and just writing down what came? How did that experience evolve?
I think I was so desperate, and I knew that my corporate career, I couldn't keep doing it. So I think I was really like putty in their hands at that point. And it became it was really interesting. As I mentioned before, I was quite unemotional in my corporate work. And that was a benefit for me. Like I worked on alcohol and gambling, and there's no heart in that work for me. And that's what made me good at it. And then when I had my awakening, I suddenly started crying in TV commercials, and it was like my heart had been cracked open. I think I had no choice but to welcome in that support. And I think it was just a perfect storm. Then it was when I was on my knees that I was finally ready to just give myself over to whatever they were asking me to do or encouraging me to do.
And so to connect to that, would you have a daily practice of meditation and writing?
Definitely the daily practice of writing. It felt like a compulsion, and I still feel that compulsion now. I was meditating probably not to connect as such, but just as a way of helping me deal with everything that was going on in our lives at that time. It was like once I'd had that awakening, there wasn't any turning it off. I didn't have to do anything to tune into it. It was like all the lights had come on, and there was that cat meme where it's like everything seen can no longer be unseen. It was just that moment where there was no turning back, and I just had to throw myself into it. So I just started writing every day, and that's what life has been like. And
when you talk about where you felt like Krishna was in your body and is sometimes, do you still feel that where Krishna is through your eyes almost looking around, look at this world? Is that still happening, or is that just right then?
Probably less so the looking through my eyes, but I still have different spirits jump in to me. Occasionally I work with Horus, one of the Egyptian gods, and I know that he's in my body because this is going to sound really strange, but my nose feels like a beak and my tongue feels like a bird tongue. Like it's a really strange sensation. So I can feel the energetic imprint of each of them. If I'm going to do something scary, I'll call in Kali. If I'm going somewhere where I feel like I need protection, and if I really want to amp that up, I'll ask her to jump into the driver's seat.
That was actually going to be a question I had for you, which is how do you protect your energy from malicious?
Yeah, I feel like I've got a really good posse of spirits that support me. Like I feel very lucky in that respect. that I've always got spirits around me, but I've definitely felt like the stronger I've gotten in my work that I probably get more negative attention from spirits and from other people who are less supportive. Like I've got a friend who's a psychic in LA, and he said to me that my energy now is a bit like a Boeing 737 going through the sky. You're attracting more attention than what you used to. In our healing work, we do take entities and spirits out of people if it requires it, and it does happen. It's a bit like, I think of us as wearing Velcro suits. Sometimes something sticks onto us and we can notice a change in how we feel, and sometimes we don't feel like ourselves. So I definitely get more attention from, if you think of it as like a spectrum of light, there's like the beautiful light end, and then there's also the darker, murkier end. So over the years, I've definitely had my encounters with the darker end. And I remember saying to Krishna once, we were pulling a spirit out of somebody and it was pretty dark energy. And I said to him, I don't want to do this type of work. And he said, they're always much more eloquent than what I am. But he said, it's like gardening. You can't expect to garden without getting your hands dirty. You need to know how to do everything. You can't just do one part of the light spectrum and not deal with everything else.
How did some of the other gods and goddesses come through? You started with Krishna, and you had Shiva and Isis. How did that evolve?
They just tend to come in at different times. Like we went to Mount Shasta in California, and I picked up Saint Germain there, and he's been in my healings ever since. And it was strange because right before we did this, I said to Isis, can you clear my mouth and my tongue and my throat just to make sure that I can speak really clearly? She deals with the throat and the heart generally in our healing work. And if I get anxious, sometimes I get a stutter. And I said, can you just clear it? And then I heard Khufu. And so I need to look into Khufu now, because he was a spirit that was obviously trying to get my attention right before this podcast interview. So it tends to just happen at different times. I really do believe that the spirit world is like our world, in that just like we know people down here and we get introduced to people at networking events, that sometimes in a healing they'll bring in someone new that I haven't met before who's got a certain specialty, and we'll work with them. And then because I've met them, then I can then call them in if we need them again. So I think their world operates very similarly to our world. We just don't think of it in that way.
It continues to show me that we are so supported in this life, and that this life is so purposeful. And when I think about you and this compulsion to write, let's say, it feels like what you're receiving is all this information that everybody wants all of us to know so that we can make the most of being in this human body. Is that what you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was back in 2016 when I started doing the writing, and I'd said to them, what's all this for? And they said, this is, how did they describe it? That what we were going to be writing was guides for how we were destined to live, not actually how we're living now. And at that time, they'd said to me too that all of the planes would land in 2020. And they didn't tell me why everything was going to land in 2020, but they said, we're creating all of these books and resources for after that period of time. And then when 2020 happened, then it all made sense.
It's so interesting when we hear that from you. We've talked to so many people who prior to 2020 had these messages. It validates so much when you hear people from all over the world hearing somewhat of that same type of message. There's a reason.
Absolutely.
Who are some of the other gods and goddesses that you work with, Courtney?
So Krishna and Shiva are, I guess, like my leads from the Hindu world.
And who's Shiva?
They call Shiva the destroyer, but I actually see him as a creator, as in sometimes the slate needs to be wiped clean in order for new things to grow. So he's known as the destroyer in that world. He's fantastic. He gives actually really great no bullshit business advice as well. So they're very holistic in the advice that they can give us. We also get Kali, I get Isis, I get lots of Egyptians. So Isis, Saint Germain, as I mentioned. And then sometimes recently there's a South American healer who comes in and I see him laying leaves over people's bodies. And I guess there's a core team that we work with. And then, as I said, they'll just bring in whoever they feel we need for that session, because we work on such a breadth of issues for people. So,
well, and I know from Karen and my experiences that what's so interesting too for you, and clearly for us, but for you too, there are these different gods or goddesses or deities that come in that you haven't worked with before. And you're trying to figure out almost through it, you're sounding out the name, and then you're going to to look at who is this person? Who is this being? Yeah. And they really are just coming through you as that channel for our highest good and really the highest good of all. But so
yeah, and I think that's what's helped me believe over the years, because there's been a lot of times where I thought I've been going crazy, and then I'll hear words or I'll hear different things phonetically in my mind, and then I'll look it up and it's exactly what they've said. Like, I've been learning the tarot with Shiva actually, and what he teaches me about the tarot and what I get through him, I'll look it up, and it's the exact meaning of the card. Like, I just, even with last year, I started getting herbal information. If someone tells me that they've got an injury or a rash, or it just pops straight into my mind as to what plant they need. And it's not something I went looking for. It just all of a sudden arrived, which is how it seems to go. I think as long as we're open and we're not judging what's trying to come through, then I think we've got the abundance of the universe trying to come through us. It's when we question it too much or we get too lost in our heads that we constrict. Yeah.
That's so true. Can we just talk about your process? For those listening, what you do is you reserve a specific time, usually about an hour, where the person who's receiving is meditating or just laying in a comfortable place, and then you do your thing. So I know where I was sitting and what I was doing on my end, but can you just talk a little bit about what you were doing and how that experience usually goes for you?
Yeah, for me personally, I find that it's best for me to write. So I know a lot of practitioners work face to face, but for me, that's like having one foot in this world and one foot in another. It's just easier to manage if I can just completely tune in and do the work with them without trying to be in two places at once. So I just open up my laptop, open up a note in Evernote, and I've got my client notes of what you'd like to work on, which is normally how you're feeling mentally, emotionally, and physically, and if you have a question. And then I always see us in a rainforest. Occasionally that location changes from time to time if it warrants it. And it's normally Krishna who takes the lead. And when I close my eyes and tune in, I always see the person lying on a white stone healing table. And then basically the spirits take over from there. And I'll pipe up at different times and say, can we work on this? Or they've mentioned that they'd like to work on this. But basically I see my job as a documentarian. It's my job to just write and convey as much of what I'm seeing and hearing as possible. So I type like a maniac for about an hour.
I honestly, I was so curious. I'm so glad we're talking about this, because Karen and I have shared with each other. We share everything together. So we've shared each other. And when I received my reading and from you, I was thinking, how did she and by the way, you get it rather quickly. Like, I was surprised that it was within the hour from when we finished. And it is really like a treasured book, honestly. Yeah. And I was thinking to myself, how did she do this? And when you're reading it, you're receiving guidance, and you're also receiving all of what happened in terms of the healing part too, because these deities are also helping through you heal us in different areas so that we can move forward in this lifetime to fulfill what we came here to do. And it's all in there.
And Courtney, also you're almost like documenting like a script. And in between, you actually are showing us, you add in photos or pictures of what each of these gods look like. So you really capture not only verbally what is being heard by you, but also visually, so that we can see an illustration of what that god looks like. For me, just to be able to go back to it over and over again, I also wanted to do the research a little bit to learn more about who each one of those were and the significance of them in my particular reading. But it's so detailed, and it absolutely answers every aspect of the intention or question that you go in with. That's what I was so blown away with. What I was asking for was clarity, and there was no lack of clarity in the detail of the reading that you gave to me, or that I received from everyone. I think Robin and I said, it's really been one of the best readings that we've had.
Readings and healings.
Yeah. I just really feeling that afterwards.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think to the point too that you brought up, Courtney, is that there is also that prep, which is you're understanding where we are in that day for that reading in terms of mental, emotional, and physical, and our overall intention for the session?
Yeah, so I never actually read the notes until I start because I never want to be influenced by any information prior. And I go into this, it's like a trance state. It feels like meditation. I don't know if when you meditate, if you get to that really beautiful sweet spot where you don't want to come back, it feels like that. And it's just me sitting and I just give myself over to it for that period of time and don't filter anything. That's been a journey from the start to where I am now. Is Jules, my wife, jokes that I'm like a bomb dropper because some of the information that comes through, it's a lot. It's like when the spirits finally get an opportunity to speak to you, they don't tend to do it in breadcrumbs. They'll throw loaves of bread at you for an hour to try and get your attention on the things that maybe you haven't been ready to talk about or see or hear. And so I think of it as we might be running the sprint, but for them, they're running the marathon. And so I often hear from people that it's about a year later that everything that came through in the healing really makes sense. It takes about a year to percolate and for everything to drop. So it's a longish process, but I feel really privileged to be a part of it.
There's so much depth to what you're receiving and to what's going on during that hour, right? Because they are removing blocks within you in order for what they see as your destiny path in this lifetime to come to fruition. And so they're really helping clear that path for you from an energetic space. So
I also should add too, what I was really taken with is I didn't give you a lot of detail in my intention. I was looking for just really clarity on directionally what I should be doing next. The level of detail that I received in that message was by far so on point, was so much more detailed, more relevant, more insight into my specific experience than I could ever imagine receiving. For anyone listening who may want to be looking for real clarity and real affirmation and that level of detail, for me, that really came through. Along, as Robin keeps saying, with that healing, which is part of what's necessary, right? When you're asking a big question and you want to change direction or you want to do something different or big in your life, having that, whether it be cord cutting or just healing in itself, to be able to let go of some of the things that are holding you down is also such a freeing part of what you get from this reading.
Yeah. And that's why I like doing a guidance element and also the healing element in the healings, because when I first started, I was just doing readings and the readings are great. But if you've got a block in your body and you've got a fear that's lodged in you, then it doesn't matter how much great information you get if you can't actually act on it. So I still offer readings now, but I definitely, if people ask, which should I get? I always go for the healing, because I think why not also make the most of what they can remove or unlock at that same period of time as you're getting the guidance that you need. And I actually really like it when people don't give me any information. I enjoy going into them sometimes with no information at all, because it's almost a bit thrilling to just throw yourself completely into it with no background. And I've been working with them long enough now to know that what comes through is what's needed at that time. If I walk out of a healing and I really love it, Jules will often say to me, how did work go this morning? And if I say I love it, it's definitely going to be some kind of, like I said, a bomb dropper. Like a really big, huge drop of guidance.
I was just going to say, I know for me, and because I know Karen so well, and I know her reading, there was so much truth and validation in ways I don't think either of us could have imagined. One of the things, and I think Karen's okay with me saying this, that came through hers is that she is this medicine woman. She is a seer, and there was much more detail, but that is so true. And just for her to really embody that and to hear that from these spirit, it was so validating
and supportive as well.
Yes.
There was nothing that kind of came through that I felt in the reading that wasn't in my heart and soul that I felt and knew, but it was that validation that it's actually really what I'm supposed to be doing, but also that I'm supported. And those two things are the game changer for moving forward.
I think that's my favorite part, is just how seen people feel. And I think we live in a world where we don't feel seen and where we're kind of skip along the surface of the earth like rocks, and it's very rare that we get to actually have the really deep parts of ourselves seen. And I think that's probably my favorite part, is just that it's like an hour in time where, and I've got goosebumps, it's an hour in time where you feel like someone can actually see you for who you are and what your gifts are. It's beautiful.
And I know what I found even more incredible was that I was seeing so many and feeling so many specific things that were completely detailed in the reading that came through, that it's still unbelievable to me. Because the way you described, and to Karen's point, where you put the pictures of different gods and goddesses, but also for me, it was, you also put a picture of what you saw when you started. And that's exactly what I saw. Because for me, it was very much in this Egyptian place. So anyway, I just couldn't get over it because it was very tangible. The feel, I could smell, I could see where I was, and then everything else that came through. And I think for me, what was so incredible is I'm trying to think of how to put, would you say Amit is a god?
Yeah. And I had to do some research as well afterwards, because what I was seeing was this crocodile god. And then I heard Amit, and so it's a journey for me too.
And I love the way that you bring some of these gods and goddesses up that have been captured in a way that may feel scary, if that is the right word, but yet it's misunderstood. It's miscommunicated through time. And when you really look, it makes a lot of sense to me why that god came through for me and what my role had been years ago, or however we want to look at timelines, could be right now. You know what I mean? So
I would also say I encourage people as they're going through the experience with you, Courtney, to make little notes as they're sitting there. I did that. And again, being in the forest, like for me, it started in the forest, but there's so many little glimmers that made me feel even more connected to the reading, because there were things that came through also that I could see. So I felt like I was really present. And I think it just helps you lean into that healing aspect even more when you can really put yourself there with you in that experience there. I think one of the questions we also had is, okay, so what's the now what? And as you were saying, for some people, it can take a year for this to really percolate and integrate into their daily experience. Are there pointers that you would give someone how you can begin to really action that in your day-to-day in a real life way?
Yeah, it's tricky because we work on everything from injuries through to life purpose. And it's such a huge breadth of work that we do. I think the best thing to do is just to sit with it, and to sit with it really openly. I often tell people to find a quiet space, grab a cup of tea, and continue to go back to it over time, because I think the spirits see things. They see the whole journey. They see all of our past lives, everywhere that we've been before, exactly where we are now, where we're destined to head in the future. And what they're giving us in that moment is this conversation that we wouldn't have otherwise had. And then what the hell do you do with all of this really life-changing information? And I think the only advice that I can give is just to sit with it and just to keep going back to it, and to remain open-hearted, and to use it as a bit of a North Star for where you're going moving forward. There's been things that they've told me over the years and I haven't acted on them, like in 2019 in Santa Monica, in this beautiful Indian garden. And they said to me, you should take up tarot. And I just ignored it. And it's now trying to catch up on time. And it's however many years later, and I'm in love with tarot. But if I had just listened to them at that time and acted on these crumbs that they do throw you, along with all the loaves of bread, that our lives could just be so much more effortless and easy. You get this slab of information. If you could just sit down and sit with it and distill it and act on it slowly and gracefully over time, I think life can just entirely change. I also think that our pain threshold is so high. We're so used to living and feeling not good that I think it's really hard for us to believe that we could actually be happy or fulfilled. And often what they give us can seem like a big leap. Like we've had sessions with people where they've said, you're a painter and you're going to do really successful gallery exhibitions. And it's someone who's never picked up a paintbrush. Like, where do you go from there other than just picking up a paintbrush and giving it a go? So,
yeah. And I think you're right. I think because the information, I know for me, it was very affirming. It is a leap. And there's so many aspects in there of things that I could do or try. It is smart to sit with it and maybe even keep that as like your monthly thing that you look at once a month just to see how you feel. And I don't know, if you have people you can share it with that you trust, that will be affirming as well. For me, I've shared it with Robin and my husband, a few other people that I trust to maybe hold me a little accountable or to even help me see aspects of it that I haven't seen in myself.
I think too, the words can change over time. And I get this feedback from people that they'll continue reading it and they'll read it once a month, or they'll come back to it a year later and they'll get completely different things from it than the first time that they read it. I really do think that it's in line with where we're evolving to, and that we'll get what we need from it at the time. And then when you go back to it in 6 months' time, you're going to get something different from it again, because you're ready to see that aspect that perhaps you weren't ready to see before.
Great point. Really
well, and how are you incorporating tarot now into your work?
So I do a weekly tarot reading in Ente, which is my virtual space, but I'm about to start opening it up to personal readings. So I've been told that I've been a tarot reader before in another lifetime, and I sometimes see my hands as really wrinkly and old when I do them. So I see this other aspect that comes forward. Yeah, it's beautiful. For me, it's another way of gathering guidance. And I think the visuals of it are beautiful. Like for me, the fascination with tarot is that it covers the whole soul's journey from start to finish across our lifetime. And I never really looked at it in that way. And once I did, I couldn't unsee that. I think it's a beautiful guidepost. And I think sometimes having those visuals and those archetypes, and the spirits have actually told me that those different archetypes, they're like spirits kept within the cards, that they can help you as well. So I think it's sometimes hard for our minds to totally integrate how much help there is and that it's in everything.
I haven't thought about tarot in that way.
I haven't either. I don't think I've ever heard it described that way.
When I was doing a reading one day, and I can't think who it was, I can't think which card it was, but she actually started speaking through the card, and it was a voice I hadn't heard before. That's what I love about this world. And I think people are so terrified of it, but there is just so much help. And I think religion has played a really big part in separating us from ourselves and from all of this amazing divine help that we have access to. And I think the spirit world, whilst there is that spectrum of light and there's a murky end, it's definitely nothing to be afraid of. I feel so loved and supported. And I think that's maybe part of my role here, is to show people how much support there is for them from the other worlds and from all of the guides that we have individually as well as collectively.
Let's talk about Ente Collective. And where does the name Ente come from?
Yeah, so I actually wrote this down because, as I said, I'm never as eloquent as what the spirits are, but Krishna actually named Ente, and he said, Ente is the state of oneness we achieve when we be, rather than react or be stuck in the past or in the future. It's a state of being. So I fell in love with making meditations, and we make these, we call them healing meditations, where I will channel all of the words in a healing and record it, but it's actually the spirit's energies are imbued or infused with the actual meditation. And it's a space where basically I want people to be able to come and hang out and to work on themselves and to have access to all of these meditations and healings that we're doing with the spirits, so that you can work on it at your own pace. Because whilst it's great to have a healing, say once a year, or we've got more people that we see regularly as well, I think it's nice at 10 p.m. at night to be able to do a sleep meditation with some energy to help you go to sleep. Or even before I stepped into this, I did what it was called. It was one to access higher consciousness, and it was amazing. So I do them myself as well. Like we've got ones for muscle regeneration and intuition, past lives. It's a space where I put all my creation.
And they are powerful. Having done the meditations myself, I'm just amazed. And Karen and I meditate pretty often using all different types of meditations. I will say that the ones that you have created with the team are just tremendously powerful.
They are.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to also point out to everyone listening that in addition to having all of these beautiful offerings, it's a community.
Yes.
And so you really find like-minded people who are also on the journey and wanting to share the journey and what they're learning and their feelings and so forth. And so you can feel it.
Yeah, I'm really proud of us, the whole community, and what we've put together. There's healers and astrologists and lots of people who are just at the beginning of their journey, who are just at a point in their life where they want more or they want to discover more of themselves as well. We do a weekly channeled message from the spirits, and that's always bang on for what people need to hear. And we do a weekly tarot reading, and then I add new meditations and healings. We do a live healing every month, which is a great way for people to just be in those energies and to have a reset as well. But it's become the thing that I love and obsess over, because I really want to help people connect with who they are, not who the world wants them to be, but who they actually are. So this is my way of helping people do that.
Which also I wanted to bring up, at the end of each of our readings, we were given our soul's name.
Yes.
Can you just expand on what that means?
Yeah, so we obviously take on a new name in every lifetime, and that tends to be the name that our parents give us. But then what I noticed in the healings is that sometimes the spirits would refer to the person we're working with by a different name that they refer to as the soul's name. So there is a name that we have that is carried with us regardless of the current face and name. And so it's something that I like to ask. We don't do it in every session. Sometimes they'll just talk about it, and it's amazing. I'm like a big nerd, so I love to look up the meanings of things after. So I'll often look at the soul's name that's been given, and then I'll look at the actual meaning of the name, and it always lines up. And I've got no idea if we choose our soul's name at the beginning of our journey or whether it's given to us. But yeah, there is a name that we have that goes through every lifetime that I think it has a lot of power in medicine that I probably should look more into.
It was very meaningful. It really resonated, and something that I'm now thinking about all the time.
That's good. I'm glad.
There's a resonance that you get when you receive the name. I know when I got mine too, it was almost a recognition. It made me emotional. I knew that name was mine.
Yeah, it made me feel more powerful. So thank you.
I think we can feel those depths to ourselves, but we're not given the roadmap on how to find that. There's so much that we remember and we don't consciously remember it, but there's a knowing when something happens. And I just think those things just show us the depth of who we are, which is nice to get beyond the current life and to actually feel those depths and have something that's tangible attached to it.
Yeah.
One of the things that Robin and I were talking about was, through all of these readings that you've been doing, Courtney, is there one sort of universal truth, universal thread that you think would resonate with everybody who's listening now, something that they should know that would help them as well?
Yes. And I actually asked Krishna about this beforehand. I said, what do you want to say? And I'd once asked him if he could sum everything up that he's taught me through the books, what would it be? And he said, if we each sought to live with a kind heart and gentle hands, the earth would be a far more compassionate place.
That is true. That's beautiful. And let's talk about your books. Can you tell everybody the books that you currently have out and a little bit about what they're about?
Yeah, we've got 5 books that we've written. And that once again is me just typing like a maniac. I think it was 2020. I had Isis drop in and say, close down the healings for 2 weeks. We're going to do a new book. And then I just sit in the bedroom and type like crazy. It's just, I guess, like being a secretary. I just hear everything and just type it. But the first book that we did was called Conversations with Krishna, which was Krishna's perspective on how we're living now, but more importantly, how we were destined to live. And that's so beautiful. And people say that there's a magic to that where they can ask a question and open up a page and it will always give the right answer of what you're grappling with. Then we did Awakened Souls with Krishna, and that's a book about spiritual awakening and the things that you might be encountering in that process. That's more of a look at the soul. Then we did Universal Law, which was actually about Atlantis. And Krishna talks from his own perspective about Atlantis and how the fall of Atlantis, and it's weirdly synchronistic with what we're going through now in the world today. That's
so much about this.
We need to talk about that. And then
that's another podcast.
Yes.
okay.
I think coming up, let's read it and then talk about that.
Yeah, that was a fascinating experience. I love to learn. My fantasy is just to lock myself in a lab and learn all the information in the world. And so I love the opportunity to do a book because I just get to sit and listen. Then we did a book with Isis that was from her perspective over time and where we've come from, and once again, where we are now and how I think off the path humanity has trodden. And then there's a beautiful guide that I work with called Akira, and we did a book together, and that one's more about creativity and unlocking the soul in that form. It's been a while since I've had a book project. I'm excited for when they give me another one We worked on 43 new meditations recently, and that was a month of just nothing else but working on that. But it tends to be like a quick warning and then clear your schedule, and then we go all in.
I feel people need the meditation so that they too can start to channel in some of this energy for themselves and get them to that place. So I think that's probably why they've been coming through you. And boy, do you have Isis to thank today. You have spoken so eloquently, Courtney, on
Thank you.
every level. I keep listening to all these sound bites that you're giving us, and they're just beautiful. I love everything that you've said, and it's just been so inspiring. I'm going to go out and get every one of those books.
Me too. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for everything today. And thank you. Thank Krishna. Thank everyone who helped to show up today. And really just number one, thank you for being vulnerable and telling us about your story. And then for all the guidance and wisdom that's come through and for all the work that you are doing and continue to do. We're really grateful.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm appreciative of having supportive people like you both in my life. It helps to keep nudging me forward. So thank you.
The impact that you're having, at least for us, I can say firsthand, is life-changing, really. It's something that we can carry with us and think about it. And as you've been saying, let it permeate our lives. Let's look at it another year and see where it takes us and what the meaning is in another year.
And it's the combination with that healing and really helping remove those blocks. It's all of it together.
Yeah. We'll have to do another one because the second one is always, I feel like the first one is always just taking an ice pick and breaking that surface level. So the second one for me is always exciting as to what is the next layer to be divulged.
And I'm excited for others that we know and love, and for everyone listening today to reach out and start this process because, as Karen just said, it's life-changing.
Thank you. I wholeheartedly appreciate that.
To find out more about working with Courtney or the Ente Collective, visit courtneybeck.co. So Courtney, and that's COURTNEYBECK.co. You can also follow her at courtneybeck.co on Instagram. Thank you.